My name is Ashley, and this is Let's Talk Dispatch.
I do. You're gonna do it. Do it really well.
And I believe the world needs more dispatchers.
Around in the mud, blood, and
plus
beer.
years that I'm not working 4th of July. 4th of July.
Say community policing, right? What about community dispatching?
So on this show, with the help of my guests, we will educate, empower, and support the heroes behind the headset. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode here of Let's Talk Dispatch with me, the Raspy Dispatcher. And just like that, we're in November and the new year is just around the corner. And I know for a lot of folks, this is kind of the time of year where things start to slow down a bit. Kids are coming out of school. We're on vacation. We're spending time with our family. But as you and I know, folks who are first responders, shift workers, the holidays can bring a special level of weird. So if you are one of the many dispatchers, officers, firefighter, paramedics, first responders in general, the list goes on, spending this holiday season, serving the community that you work in. From me to you, thank you so much. You really are appreciated. And I know sometimes it's hard not being able to spend those days with your family, but it's definitely reality in the work that we do. Someone has to respond to the calls 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So thank you so much for your guys' service, especially during these holiday times. So with that, we're going to get into today's episode with my guest, Ivan Whitaker. He's a VP of Partner Success at MD Ally, but he has years and years of experience in this field, from being in the field as an EMT to being dispatched to the private sector. So here is Ivan. Hi, Ivan. How are you?
Hey, Ashley. How you doing?
I am doing well. I am back from my vacation, ended my first work week back into the real world, and I'd rather be in Hawaii. But
I agree. And you look refreshed. You look ready to go.
Thank you. I do. I feel refreshed. I do. Sometimes, vacations can feel like more work, but I definitely think this one was a very relaxing situation. So I really enjoyed it.
Well, glad to have you back and ready to go. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for reaching out, wanting to come onto the show. I really appreciate it. And I'm really excited to talk about all your experience in this line of work and how you got into public safety.
Well, was a neat kind of story for me. I have an uncle that was in Marion County, Florida, that had been in dispatch for many, many years. As a matter of fact, when it was all said and done, it was 35 plus years.
Wow.
Started out at the funeral home. So back then, the EMS was really across the country ran by funeral homes, to where there were really no protocols in place. You just got a call and you picked someone up, and that's how EMS really started in a lot of areas. And so he was with a local funeral home and was told about emergency medical technician program, to where at that time school was just a couple of days. It was a pamphlet and then you went on your way. So he went and took the program. He was excited about it, and then was hired on with the local ambulance service that had just gotten started. And then some years later, I was in school, I was in college, and he reached out to me and said, hey, do you want to become an EMT? And we have a tuition reimbursement program that can pay for the rest of your education. And it was intriguing. So from there, became an EMT, became a paramedic, worked my way up into numerous leadership roles in the field, and then got exposed to dispatch, where I really fell in love on the dispatch side. And so that's how I came into the field. It was my uncle. It was a story of networking. And my family has been in public safety for many, many years. I have a sister that's a police officer, brother-in-law. And so that's what we do.
Mm-hmm. That's so awesome when it's like a family affair. You know what I mean? Because I think sometimes you either stumble and you're like, I don't know what in the world I'm getting into right now, or you have someone holding your hand going, come on, come on, it's okay. Let's.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. I was that kid that had the blue bag that drove around in the car that stopped at traffic accidents. I fell in love with it. And my uncle figured that I would love it. So,
Yeah. And I would imagine that I know a few folks who were EMTs in the field who came into dispatch. And I think there's two type of dispatchers, right? There's ones who want to, I wouldn't say want, but don't mind seeing the thing, and then there's some who are just like, I'm in here because I don't want to see the thing.
right.
Um, what would you say like the differences between being in the field and in the dispatch center were for you?
Yeah. Well, it's a huge transition because in your mind, especially at the time in the field, looking at our procedures, we did what we call ALS, advanced life support, and BLS, basic life support,
Mhm.
to where you can see the patient, you can touch them, right? You
Mhm.
can look at body movement and gestures and things of that nature to be able to treat the patient. When you go inside of the dispatch center, you don't have that advantage.
Mhm.
So their voice and what they're saying, that's your ear. And guess you're,
Mhm.
that's what's happening. You have to take their word at, you don't have the environment around you to help you put the pieces together a lot of times. So dispatchers do what we call dispatch life support, right? So it's a totally different healthcare discipline, and it's based on the fact that there's just certain things that you can't do or can't see or can't know from a dispatch perspective. So it's just very, very different from how things have to be observed, heard, listened to, those type of things.
Yeah. And so I only dispatch police. I never done medical. I don't have a desire to do medical. I think medical dispatchers, you guys are like a whole different breed of
Right,
dispatch. And I mean, it's just such, it's challenging to get anyone in crisis to follow directions, right?
right,
But getting them to follow medical like pre-arrivals and get them to do the things to ultimately save this person's life just by using your voice, like that's a whole another level of skill that folks possess in this field. And I wonder, since you have that experience with medical dispatch and we talk about technology coming into our dispatch centers and video starting to become available to dispatchers as a tool provided to callers to like, let's see what's actually going
right.
on the scene. Do you think that that technology in a medical situation would be beneficial to a medical dispatcher, being able to see the environment, the color of their lips, or, an injury or anything like that?
Yep. I certainly I believe that there's a place for it in verifying information that's already obtained.
Mhm.
So there's definitely a place for it, but we have to be careful with it. In implementing it, there needs to be, what are we trying to seek and gain from obtaining this information? Is
Mhm.
this information easily obtained by questions that we're asking, and then so we say consistent with whatever we're using to screen the call or whatever protocol we're using, or does it take away because we're solely focused on what we're seeing in the video and taking us away from the continuity of care that we need to deliver over the phone? So that stuff still needs to be flushed out. I know that there's
Mhm.
various or standard setting bodies that are working on this right now that are trying to figure it out. I do think that there's value, but again, it has to be really, really researched to figure out what that value is. And I'll give an example, right?
Mhm.
You might want, from a CPR perspective, to be able to look at the scene and look and see if the depth of the compressions are adequate, or if CPR is actually taking place, right?
Mhm.
But there's also things from a voice perspective that you can do to verify that. So again, it's just making sure that, I think of as a verification process, it's good. When it comes and overtakes the call, there could be some challenges if that's solely what you're focusing on.
Yeah, totally, totally true. And so I know that, we talked a little bit before jumping on here. And one thing that I did want to make sure we talked about a bit was 988.
Hmm.
So I know that, I don't know, I've been kind of hearing some mixed reviews in like the dispatch Facebook circles and things like that in regards to 988. I'm a fan of it.
Hmm.
I think simpler, the better. If I only got to dial three numbers when I'm in crisis, if I can refer that to people, I think it's an easier process. Um, Like, can you just tell me about your knowledge in 988 and the services in regards to dispatch and how they can utilize it as a resource for folks who are calling us in crisis that we maybe don't have the best tools for them?
Very good. Yeah. So 988 is such a valuable resource. I am a person that is a proponent of it. I believe in it. It's something that's been a long time coming. And if you can think about the way you use poison control now, right, as a resource, to where think of life in a dispatch center without poison control. So when we're looking at 988 as a resource, it is indeed a resource, and the providers as a part of 988 are specifically trained to be able to work with patients over the telephone, to where that training in the 911 environment, while we're starting to pick up training and what that is and what that should be, as you know, there's been a long time coming into what specific training is required to be able to speak to and be able to guide patients that are having mental health crisis in those situations. So that resource, I think, is pivotal. Now, some of the challenges that you might have experienced is, how do we get the call over to 988? What qualifies for 988? What are the protocols or SOPs that need to be put in place? What is the quality assurance that we need to go back and kind of the parameters or KPIs or things that we need to be looking at to make sure that we handle it the right way? There's also a liability component when we're looking at the 911 environment to make sure that what we're sending over is the right thing. So while it's a great resource, I would advise at the local level, to where when we're looking at the committees and we're looking at the SOPs and the things that need to be put in place to assure that calls get transferred, the appropriate calls get transferred, that's where the work takes place. And so there are things that are come out. I know SAMHSA, Vibrant, they're working with various organizations. They're working with NINA, the International Academies of Emergency Dispatch, and various other organizations to try to get things out there. That, for example, there's a document out there. It's called 911 PSAP Readiness for 988. And so if folks have not seen that document or haven't gotten their hands on that, it's a very good guide to how to be ready for 988. But yeah, like I said, it's a great resource. It's just the preparedness for it. Time has to be spent at the local level of preparing on what qualifies to be transferred over to 988.
Definitely. And I do think that, we always need more training, right? In the field, in our dispatch centers, we could always use more and more training. Tools are always developing and changing, and strategies and whatnot. And I definitely think talking to folks who are having mental health crisis is definitely something we as dispatchers do need additional training on, because I think about it with like my previous agency where we had a lot of high priority calls all the time.
Right.
We're essentially CNTs for the first 5-10 minutes of the call, until someone gets there, or if someone decides to barricade themselves, we're keeping the line open until we can actually get the officer on the phone or successfully transfer it.
Right.
All these things are occurring before CNT trained, actual official CNT trained people are coming onto the line. So I do think that we should have more training in regards to that crisis negotiation, even outside of the mental health aspect, any type of CNT training.
Absolutely. Now that you mention it, there is a certification that's out right now through the 911 Training Institute. It's called the Emergency Mental Health Dispatch Certification. And Jim Marshall is the founder of the 911 Training Institute. And it would be worth going on that website and actually taking a look at that training. And so again, there's certifications. That's not the only thing that's out. There's briefings. There's just a lot of literature that's out right now that can help agencies prepare their emergency dispatchers for the 988 environment.
Definitely. So do you remember any of your early calls, first calls? I imagine 911 has changed significantly during your career. Kind of what was it like back then versus now?
I could tell you if we want to look at the difference, I would say call volume is certainly a difference, right? To where when I first started, in the field, we used to go fishing during the shift, right? We'd actually have a fishing rod and right and reports. Everything was paper, everything was condensed, right? But as time has changed, the call volume has increased across the country. I think the average is about 3% every single year. The requirements, the documentation, privacy laws, those type of things, which are all great things, but at the same time, I think the shift has been tremendous. And I'll give you another example in the shift, the requirements in the dispatch center to where, when I first started, there are no protocols that you had to use or go by or pre-arrival instructions. I remember it used to be that people felt that if you provided pre-arrival instructions like CPR, for example, that you would be liable. Now we know that that's far from the truth, that if you don't have specific protocols in place, that you will be liable. Right. We now know, looking at research and science, there's things like a sinking vehicle where getting the person out of the vehicle is even more prevalent than a dispatch, because we know if responders make it on scene and the person's still in the vehicle, then they're probably dead. Right.
Yeah.
So we're starting to look at calls in a different way, to where now it's transitioned to alternative resources and alternative care, to where, okay, should we be sending certain type of resources? Is it more viable for us to send alternative resources or treat a patient via telehealth, telemedicine, or mobile integrated health, to where we transition people over out of the 911 system into mobile integrated health? So I've had the unique ability to be able to see that migration, even in tech space, where before, getting any changes from a tech perspective in 911 was like boiling the ocean, right? It wasn't going to happen. I remember when we transitioned from a DOS CAD to a different system, and it was just like moving mountains, right, to get that to happen. To where now Silicon Valley and the tech space is now merging with the 911 space, to where it is a different dynamics. I think Obamacare had to do a lot with that, and some of the money's available. There are more startups for techie startups in the 911 space now. So I've had a unique ability to be able to see that migration.
Yeah, and that's so cool because I've talked to OG dispatchers in my center and stuff like that, and I'm just like, I don't know if I could have done the job back when you started, 'cause they would talk to me about it. It was like manual mode all the time, 24/7. And
Yeah,
I'm just like, I have successfully, knock on wood, avoided manual mode for
yeah,
the majority of my career. And I just couldn't imagine dispatching without the tech that we have today,
right,
without the mapping capabilities we have today. Um, for our units and for our callers, though it's not perfect. We used to not have those things. Those things were like you had to use a map book and all these, for me, someone who kind of grew up in the era where computers were and internet and all that was kind of being developed as I grew up.
right.
I couldn't imagine doing this job without that technology. In fact, not having the policy and the procedure would give me major anxiety. I'm definitely a policy gal. What's policy? I'm all for style, but what's the policy?
Right,
Um,
right.
so I just couldn't imagine.
I remember when, who, what, when, where, that was the SOP. That's what you did. That was I also remember in the field when we got the dispatcher started giving us map book pages, to where we didn't have to really worry about what map book page to go to. That was huge technology back in the day, right?
Oh
So,
my
so
gosh.
now what they have at their fingertips in the field and dispatch is just amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, even for me, when I went through my academy up in SAC, they still have map books available at our stations for if and when the system goes down. And I remember they're like, "Oh," showing me how to use a map book, and I was like, "This is wild." I'm just jumping on my phone and I'm gonna Google it, this, just this thought process that you have to be able to use these systems, these older systems, because you never know when technology is gonna fail us, and it will fail us.
Yeah,
Um, but just the fact that they weren't like, this was the standard. This is how I mapped my officers. This is how I told them
Right.
where this call was going. Like, and then that means my officer has a map book in their car type of thing. It's just wild to me.
Well, and it's difficult now because we know, and there are numbers that have been put out there. We believe that many dispatch centers are 30 to 50% understaffed, right? So
Mhm.
you have that influx of new hires coming in. So imagine training without the technology. Imagine training without protocols and consistency. It would be challenging to do the who, what, when, where for everyone that comes in now.
Mhm.
So things have changed. So thank goodness for technology.
Definitely advocate for technology in our 911 centers. Um, so speaking of low staffing and like, you know, which is a reality in all of our centers. I have been in my career again very lucky. The centers I have worked at while I have worked there have been very well staffed. I haven't had too many mandated overtimes, or I've been very lucky to avoid that harsh reality in the dispatch world. But I know that is not the case across the board, across the states, across the country. Um, what is kind of your advice on burnout, and how centers can manage that reality in this workforce?
I've had a unique opportunity to do consulting all over the world as far as infrastructure inside of dispatch centers and the right workflows, the right SOPs, the right technology from staffing perspective, what that should be, could be. And one of the things that I have to encourage directors and executive staff is you have to think outside of the box. Dispatch is totally different from a staffing perspective, usually, than what is experienced by field providers. A lot of times when I would go into the dispatch centers, they would basically try to mirror exactly what is in the field. So you have a lieutenant that's over X number of staff and so on. And so, thinking outside of the box about varying shifts, thinking outside of the box about when the calls are actually coming in and where the staff are actually needed versus trying to staff consistently or the same numbers across the board. That's very important. Some agencies are overhiring, meaning that they know that about 50% of their trainees that come in won't make it through. So why don't we hire more, because the numbers show what it's going to be as far as this hiring pool. Some agencies are using part-timers to where they will, especially in horizontal dispatch centers that dispatching and call taking are separate. They might say, okay, we'll train you up on call taking, and you can, and when you come in, if you're going to college or whatever the case, we'll use you as a part-timer, and they're getting very good with those type of things. You even have some dispatch centers are starting to figure out how to let people call take from home. Right. So that's a new thing that's being tested right now that is working in some agencies. So, one of the things that I would say, in quantifying the appropriate staff, I use something and I term it dark matter. Right. So dark matter, if you think about it, if you have a sheet, then you put a bowling ball on that sheet, there'll be an indentation, right? And so sheet will want to pull towards that bowling ball. That kind of simulates gravity. So in space, that's what gravity is a fabric. It's an unseen fabric, where that same unseen fabric takes place inside of the dispatch center when you're looking at things like sick leave. You're looking at things like breaks and training. All of those things that have to be quantified, that in a lot of studies, staffing analysis, they're left out. So they a lot of times on 911 calls. Another thing is what we call administrative calls. And you know what I'm talking about, talking to field crews, taking calls from citizens that are not related to 911 or emergency calls, right? You get a lot of calls from citizens after hour calls that come into your dispatch center. When I look at call volume, a lot of times when I come in the centers, they try to give me the 911 call volume, but that's not what I'm concerned with. I'm concerned with total volume because it's work, right? So there could be 70% more admin calls inside of a dispatch center that needs to be quantified as far as work to determine the true numbers that are needed in dispatch centers. And so not knowing these things also contributes to staffing issues. And
Yeah.
an example of that is burnout, right? We don't have enough staff, so we're going to leave because this is just not for us, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I definitely think that that low equity and the non-emergent call reality is definitely something we do overlook a bit. And I don't know if it's because I'm not in a supervisory role in the line of work that I'm currently in. And I don't know if it's because we don't acknowledge it because it doesn't come with the trauma that 911 calls. It doesn't have that up down as the 911 calls dropping in your ear. Um, but I would say like dealing with non-emergency calls or uh educating citizens about like what services we actually provide. We can't help you with civil stuff. We can't find your dog. We can't, for my department, we can't go out for a barking dog in the neighborhood. Like just certain things, which of course differ between the departments and what they're able to go out and assist with. But just the strain that comes from educating folks on like the services that are provided by us in our units, that's taxing as well. It can be very frustrating, quite frankly.
That's very taxing. And in relation to turnover, another challenge that I've seen consistently is when there's a pay analysis that's done, is often done compared to other dispatch centers that also have deficits as far as pay, right? So really the competitors, you have to look beyond that to look at what I call KSA's knowledge, skills, and abilities, and look across the industry, which is probably more prevalent to compare what we're doing to what's happening in the private sector as far as the requirements. I often think when you go through dispatch training, right, what you've done is equivalent probably to an AS degree with the amount of training that is required. So again, you have to just start thinking outside of the box about these things.
And it's so true because one of the reasons that the Raspy Dispatcher like sparked is because, I was fortunate enough. I went to school with a basketball scholarship. I got most of my school paid for, so I went and I got my master's degree relatively quickly after I got my bachelor's, and I got it in administration of justice as well. I always knew I wanted to be in this field, and then I went and I stumbled into dispatch. And I had my bachelor's and my master's, and I'm sitting in this full-fledged academy, this 6-7 week training academy. And that was just the in-class stuff. And then I had, on the floor training where it pretty much added up to like 18 months of training for this position, assuming you make it through.
Right.
And I was just sitting there like, I went through 7 years of education, higher education, based around this world of administration of justice. And not one person talked about dispatch.
Right.
And that was what kind of sparked the Raspy Dispatcher. I was like, we need to be talking about dispatchers. We need to be putting a light on this role because it's such a vital role and it's available as an awesome career for folks who maybe don't want to get their feet wet, or they go get their feet wet in the field and they're like, this isn't for me. And instead of leaving, this line of work, come into a dispatch center, see if that's a better fit for you. But I always thought it was like, I even remember I went back through like my books, because I always hoard my books from my education, was like, went back to the index, like D for dispatch, nothing. Like, and I always thought that was such a disservice to this line of work.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the things like forcing calls and CAD and geo-based dispatching and the multitasking skills, especially in vertical centers where they have to dispatch and call take at the same time. I mean, I can go on and on about the requirements, and you have to be pretty sharp to do well in a dispatch center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, at my new agency was the first time I've ever had to do both at the same time because we're a smaller agency. And I remember being in SAC and transferring like to CHP, and they're always doing both. And I would be on mute like, they wild. I would never. There is no world where I want to listen to my units, listen to the call, talk to another, and now, it's a smaller agency. And sometimes randomly will just get hammered and you're doing everything. You know, you're answering calls, putting them on hold, like answering the radio, you're supporting your partner if they're working radio. Like, it's just a reality sometimes.
Right.
But it is also a reality that comes back to the issue in all of our agencies. It comes down to staffing and the
Right.
funding of more bodies in our centers.
Yep.
Because you never know. And I think that's something that I would imagine people who have a hard time understanding. It's like, sure, 80% of the time, like it's code 4, we're chill.
Right.
But that 10% where, you know, we have a high priority or, you know, an officer involved shooting or some major thing happens, or even like I think every dispatcher's worst fear is you have a school shooting, you know, something that happens in a smaller environment with a smaller agency. That's what your numbers should be prepared to handle.
Yes.
You know, when it hits the fan.
Yes.
Those are the numbers we should be staffing for.
Absolutely. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned something as far as call volume and the types of calls and the priority of the calls. And you mentioned that 80% of the calls are probably, you know, non-emergency. And I like to talk to a little bit about that because it kind of sifts into the work that I'm doing right now, which I'm just so, happy about. I got to spend 10 years, a great, phenomenal 10 years with Priority Dispatch System implementing protocols. And it was just remarkable to see systems change and to be able to leave that legacy into systems across the world. But now I'm working on the resource side of the equation, which is even, it's exciting to where those low priority calls that you talked about, being able to do something about it, provide a resource that's essential for citizens, and that is telemedicine.
Mm-hmm.
So with MD Ally, what we do is when the call comes into the 911 center, if it's deemed a low priority, low acuity, a non-emergent call, 911 now has the resources to be able to reach out to us, and we can provide physicians that can actually provide help, whether it's prescriptions, we do behavioral health as well, just a variety of services that we can provide for 911 using us as a resource. So going back to some of the numbers you mentioned, we know that 1.5% of calls that come into the dispatch center are what we call true emergencies, meaning that they actually need us right now to provide a procedure or they will die. We know there's another 66% that fall in the lower categories that either need treatment by an emergency medical technician or can be treated in a quick care facility, a clinic, a doctor's office, you name it, but that more of out-of-patient care. Some of it, much of it can be treated by over-the-counter medicine. And so what we're working towards is to take that heavy lifting, that workload off of the 911 center to leave your resources in the field available to be able to handle those emergent calls, to be able to get there quicker and provide the care that the patients need. And there's also a customer service element to that as well. So if I have to go and sit in the emergency room and wait for 8 hours because this is a low priority situation or that could have been handled in a doctor's office, right? I'm probably not happy as a person waiting in that emergency room where you could have used us and actually received care right away. So I'm happy to be on that side of it. When we're looking at different communities and the types of communities that are out there and what they have access to, we're able to provide services to all communities. And I'm very, very proud of that.
Yeah, I think that's awesome because, sometimes we just don't have the answer. I've told callers multiple times, like, I can Google that for you. Like, I don't know. Like, that's not in our wheelhouse, and they're frustrated. We're frustrated. And, just being able to connect a caller who is, like you said, is in crisis in the sense that it's a crisis for them.
Yes.
Right? Like, I hear that this is a problem for you and it feels like everything's crumbling because of XYZ, but it doesn't necessarily follow under the, this is an actual emergency umbrella.
Right.
And that's always tough to tell somebody is like, because, I'll answer, we don't have a lot of lines. So I'll answer our non-emergency when our 911s are blowing up. Like, do you have a life and death emergency or can you hold? And it's just kind of like, it's almost like a trick question to them sometimes because, well, they'll start telling me the emergency and that I choose, like, that's not an emergency, you can hold, but that doesn't feel good to them. I get it because it is an emergency for them.
Right.
But one of our jobs is to decide what is the life or death emergencies and, sort through them and prioritize them in that fashion.
Yeah.
So being able to refer folks to companies like MD Ally and there's a 911 regional 911. I'm blanking on it. I use it all the time now at work though, is when someone calls 911 and they need 911 services outside of where they're calling from.
Sure. Yep.
Because everyone just picks up the phone and it's like, I need 911 in Alaska. And you're like, this is what?
Right.
How am I, and so there's a service that we transfer to. I want to say it's regional 911 where that's their job, is that they take the information. You need medical, you need police, what's the city, what's the state, and they figure out, where to send them. But
absolutely,
that service saves lives, because me Googling Alaska 911, trying to figure out what actual department serves the actual area, it's just so inundated. So services like that make our transferring lives easier saves lives.
Right. Absolutely. I like that you keep coming back to the center point, which is saving lives. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I've just had a just unbelievable career in being able to do that. And this just puts me on another side of the journey in being able to provide alternative service. And that's where 911 is going, into those alternative services, really figuring out ways that we can provide more resources for patients, for citizens. And so I'm very excited.
And I think one thing that you can speak to is that it's kind of like the options of life after dispatch, right? Because I think a lot of folks who are answering the calls in the headset, maybe they're burnt out, they're kind of ready to go, but they're not sure what's next and the opportunities that are out there. And I'm very lucky because I talk to all you guys who are in the private sectors doing all the different things. And I think it's important to highlight that for folks who are coming to the end of their careers via burnout or via it's just my time to go. And there is options to stay in this field, to stay in this line of work, to help improve these services, but not have to deal with that daily stress, trauma calls that are in our centers.
Absolutely. One of the things in looking at, if you go on any vendor in the 911 space that's providing some technology, if you go on their websites and look to see what they're hiring for, they're hiring for things like developers, product managers, project managers, right? So there's just a variety of opportunities out there that if you're in dispatch and you go to school and you want to be in a tech space or you want to be in, there's just a variety of different career paths that you can get into. I love talking to people about those career paths because again, it's not difficult. It's not as difficult as people may think to move forward and move beyond the dispatch chair. If someone spends 30 years in the dispatch chair like my uncle, that's great. That is a hugely successful career. But if you, like you said, if you want to move forward, there are career paths out there. And I really look in the tech space. I mean, system architects and things of that nature. I mean, those positions are always in abundance, always available.
Definitely. And, all this tech is wonderful, but they also have to hear from the folks who are using it. And that's the dispatchers, right?
Absolutely.
So I can dream up this technology and then it's just not feasible to the work we actually do type of thing. So definitely getting involved with these companies and in these spaces, panels, etc., is definitely something that we as dispatchers can do. I just posted a reel today telling folks hey, if you want to be a guest, jump on. If you are in this line of work, you have something to say. You have something to speak to. You don't have to be someone who's, at all these conferences and doing all the things, just a regular everyday dispatcher. We have things to say. in regards to this career, improving this career in this field. And we can bring those into the private sector.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you said. There's often a disparate view of what's happening at the dispatch console and happening in the field on a day-to-day basis versus where you get into the executive level, what they perceive to be taking place based upon when they were in the field or when they were dispatching. So yeah, the voice of the emergency dispatcher and the field providers is just essential that that voice is heard.
Definitely. So what advice would you give someone who is considering a career in dispatch?
Oh yeah, I tell you, one of the first things I would say to do is to look and see if there's any local, or if there are local workshops, if there are local opportunities to sit with emergency dispatchers and really hear the calls that are coming in, to talk to emergency dispatchers, because often what you believe you're going into is quite different, and you know this, Ashley, than what's happening in the dispatch environment. And so having that person to lean on and talk to and really get a good understanding of what it is, I think is essential. And again, there's a lot of programs out there right now, for example, high school programs, to where there are agencies that are going into the high schools and starting up high school programs. I've been involved with a lot of that, which is very exciting, to where you can get a certificate coming out of high school. You can get various certifications coming out of high school and get an opportunity to interview after high school for these jobs. Just the awareness programs that are out there are a lot different now than when I went through, right? So when I went through, I didn't know a lot. I mean, I knew about my uncle, and thank goodness I had my uncle to talk to, but if I wouldn't have had him, the perception I probably would have had versus what it really was would have been totally different. So things like this, when I was coming through, we didn't have a podcast of getting information out. So look at the podcast. There's just a lot of information. Read the materials, the magazines, the things that are out there.
I definitely think that the high school programs that I've been seeing, so freaking cool. Like, I've had, teachers actually, email me in regards to the Raspy Dispatcher channel on YouTube, like, what ones should I use for my students? And so they're being used in these high school settings. And it's just such a great day and age that we're living in, where we're getting this exposure at a young age. Because I think, one of the good things about dispatch is that it's not something you need a degree for. Like, for a lot of folks, school isn't it for them, and that's okay. And you can come out of high school and get into this line of work and have a career, a good paying, good benefits career from 18 and on. Like, I think that's amazing, like that's steps towards generational wealth. That's steps towards, being able to live the life you want to live. So definitely getting that early education and doing that research puts more people in a position to get into this career earlier. It is something I wish I would have done earlier as well. But it's definitely a beneficial aspect to get in all this, early education that's going on. I think it's awesome.
And I want to echo that as well, because, my uncle served as kind of the high school aspect, to where he was that knowledge base, to where he brought in a gentleman by the name of Jesse Modican and his wife, Kara Modican, where they came through, became paramedics and they were dispatchers as well. And now they own Modican Medical, which is a very prominent business in this space. Jackie Tuggerson, which is a district chief down in Villages, Florida, that came up through my uncle. Chris Bradford, a very dear friend of mine that's actually helping to start up some of these high school programs that we're talking about. That was my uncle, right? So all of us, my uncle, just that one influence, think about what he's done and the people that he brought in. So imagine what the high school programs, or having a high school program or a college program, can do from a diversity standpoint, from an awareness standpoint, and starting off early. Like you said, everyone's not going to go to college and get a 4-year degree, and that's okay. There are very, very, prominent positions and career paths out there to help serve the community that need those kids that are coming through, to be aware that it's just available to them.
1,000%. So where can folks reach out to you, connect with you if they want to learn more about your guys' services, or just chat with you about your experience?
Right. So very good. So I can be reached at Ivan Ivan.Whitaker at mdally.com. That's Ivan.Whitaker at mdally.com, 801-232-2233. And you can go on our website at mdally.com.
Awesome. And I'll include all that in the video description. So don't feel like you guys got to write that down. I always say that, but just FYI, I'll include it all there. Well, thank you, Ivan. This has been mind-blowing, opening. It's been wonderful. I've really enjoyed our talk today.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'll be right back with you. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Now.
All right, everybody, another amazing episode. Let's Talk Dispatch with Ivan. Thank you so much, MD Ally. Your experience, your service, and everything that you continue to do for the world of 911 dispatching is truly appreciated. If you guys are listening, make sure to hit that subscribe button, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, leave a review, all that good stuff. Until next time, stay raspy. Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Let's Talk Dispatch. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube at The Raspy Dispatcher, follow us on Instagram, and check out Let's Talk Dispatch anywhere you listen to podcasts. I'll see you next time, and stay raspy.